Utilitarianism stands as a consequentialist theory that traces the origin of the philosophical insights of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And its core, utilitarian ethics presents as a distinctive approach to moral decision-making, placing heavy emphasis on the consequence of action and their impact to the overall well-being of an individual. Utilitarianism diverse from the ontological theories that prioritize adherence to moral rules or duties regardless of an outcome. Instead, it asserts the morality of action is contingent upon the outcomes it generates specifically, to the extent of which contribute the maximization of happiness or pleasure, while minimizing the suffering or pain. The core tenet, maximizing happiness. The foundation principles of utilitarian ethics can be encapsulated by maximization of overall happiness. This central tenet suggests that the ethical discussion should be directed towards promoting the greater well-being for the great number of individuals affected by those decisions. The term utility in utilitarianism not refers for the financial or material utility, but rather the intrinsic value of happiness and pleasure. Consequentialist framework. Utilitarianism operates within the consequentialist framework, implying that the consequence of action serves the primary criterion for evaluating moral worth. The contrast with this ethical system that places more emphasis on the inherent nature of action, intention, and adherence to the absolute moral rules. Philosophical roots of Bentham and Mill. Jeremy Bentham, an 18th century philosopher and a legal scholar, formulated the utilitarian calculus that means the quantifying measure of pleasure and pain. His works laid to the groundwork for a broader utilitarian tradition. John Stuart Mill, building on Bentham's idea, produces a nuanced distinction such as a higher and lower pleasure, enriching the utilitarian framework. Applicability across diverse contexts. Utilitarian ethics finds application of various realms, from personal decision-making to the societal policies. It refers a pragmatic lens through which to analyze ethical dilemmas, guiding choices that aims to yield a great overall good. In terms of ongoing philosophical debates, despite of its influential standing, utilitarianism is not without its critique. The ongoing philosophical debates revolves around the challenges such as the difficulty of measuring pleasure and pain, concerns about individual rights, and the potential overlooking of intention behind actions. These critiques highlight the complex of applying utilitarian principles in diverse and nuanced situations. Consequentialism and utilitarian ethics. Utilitarianism, as a consequentialist ethical theory, places significant emphasis of the outcomes or the consequence of an action as the primary factor of determining the moral value. Consequentialism constructs at the deontological theories, which focus on the inherent nature of action or adherence to the moral rules, irrespective of their outcomes. The central idea of consequentialism in utilitarian ethics is as the rightness or wrongness of an action is contingent upon the overall happiness or well-being it produces. It means that the actions are morally validated based on the overall real-world results that they achieve rather than being inherently right or wrong based on the abstract principles. Consequentialism within the core principles of utilitarianism underscores the significance of the real-world outcomes in determining the moral worth of actions. This emphasis on the consequence, whether the level of individual actions or more general rules reflecting the pragmatic and adaptive nature of utilitarian ethics in navigating the complexities of moral decision-making. Utility principles. The utility principle is a foundational concept within the utilitarian ethics embodying the consequentialist nature of the theory. The principle asserts that the morality of action is determined by its contribution to the overall happiness or well-being. Often refers to us as utility to the individuals affected. As its core, the utility principles mandates the focus of maximizing overall happiness or well-being. It condemns the ethical discussion should be directed towards the action that results to the greatness, not possible balance of pleasure over pain, or the greater number of individuals. The consequentialist aspects lies in evaluating the actions based on their anticipated outcomes and their impact to the collective welfare. The utility principles within the key principles of utilitarianism reflects the consequentialist nature of the theory. It guides the decision making by emphasizing the importance of producing the greater overall happiness and well-being, incorporating with a quantitative approach through the he- hedonic calculus and allowing of adaptability of response of involving these circumstances. The hedonic calculus. The hedonic calculus is a systematic method produced by Jeremy Bentham, a foundational figure of utilitarian ethics, to the quality of measure of pleasure and pain. It serves as tool for decision making to evaluate the overall utility or happiness associated with a different course of action. The hedonic calculus consists of several factors that decision makers consider while assessing the consequence of actions. First, the intensity, the strength of pleasure and pain produced. Second, the duration, the length time for the pleasure and pain experienced. 3. The uncertainty or uncertainty, the likelihood of the pleasure or pain will occur. 4. Promiscuity, promiscuity, or the nearness, how soon the pleasure or pain will be experienced. 5 is the fecundity, the likelihood that the pleasure or pain will lead to more of the same. 6. The purity, the likelihood of the pleasure and pain will allow by its opposite. 7. The extent, the number of people affected by the pleasure and pain. The hedonic calculus aims to provide quantitative assessment of pleasure and pain, allowing decision makers to compare and evaluate the different actions based of their overall utility. Each factors assigning a value and the circumstantive results provided by the estimated of the net pleasure and pain associated with particular actions. The hedonic calculus in utilitarianism represents the methodological approach of quantifying and comparing the pleasure and pain. It serves as tool for decision makers to assess assess the consequence of an action, and make choices that align with the goal of maximizing overall happiness and well-being in the consequentialist ethical framework.
Types of utilitarianism. First is act utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is centered on the assessment of the morality of individual actions. It maintains that the ethical worth of each action is to be determined by the specific consequences it produces, emphasizing the immediate and direct outcome in a given situation. At its core, act utilitarianism is inherently consequentialist, meaning that the rightness or wrongness of an action is contingent upon the actual results it brings about. This stands in contrast to non-consequentialism ethical theories, which place significance on intrinsic qualities of actions or adherence to moral rules. Act utilitarianism offers flexibility in decision-making, allowing for a pragmatic approach that adapts to the nuances of different situations. This adaptability is strength as it enables ethical consideration to be context-specific, accounting for variables that may influence the overall utility of an action. Act utilitarianism directs attention to the immediate consequences of individual actions, using a consequentialist framework to determine their moral values. Its adaptability and focus on the specific circumstances of each situation make it a pragmatic approach within the broader utilitarian ethical framework. Second is rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism distinguishes itself from act utilitarianism by placing greater emphasis on general rules rather than evaluating each action in isolation. The focus is on adopting rules that, if consistently followed by society, would result in the greatest overall happiness. Like act utilitarianism, rule utilitarianism is grounded in consequentialism, asserting that the morality of an action or rule is determined by the actual consequences it produces. However, the focus here is on the consequences of adopting and consistently following general rules rather than individual actions. Rule utilitarianism seeks to strike a balance between the flexibility of act utilitarianism and the need for consistent moral standards. While individual actions are still evaluated based on their expected consequences, the emphasis is on whether those actions align with rules that in general to contribute the overall happiness. Rule utilitarianism introduces a nuanced approach by emphasizing the adoption of general rules that, when consistently followed, are expected to lead to the greatest overall happiness. This perspective seeks to balance the flexibility of act utilitarianism with the need for stable and predictable moral standards in society. So, critics of utilitarianism. Measurement challenges. One common criticism is the difficulty in precisely measuring pleasure and pain. The subjective nature of these experiences makes it challenging to apply utilitarian principles in a consistent and reliable manner. One significant challenge lies in the subjective nature of pleasure and pain. Assessing the intensity and quality of these experiences varies from person to person, makes it challenging to apply utilitarian principles in a consistent and reliable manner. One significant challenge lies in the subjective nature of pleasure and pain. Assessing the intensity and quality of these experiences varies from person to person, making it difficult to establish a universal standard for measurement. What may be pleasurable for one individual may not be the same for another. The attempt to quantify pleasure and pain using tools like the hedonic calculus encounters inherent difficulties. Assigning numerical values to subjective experiences lacks precision and can oversimplify the complexities of human emotions and well-being. Utilitarianism's focus on overall happiness faces challenges in accounting for cultural and individual variations in values and preferences. What brings happiness in one culture context may differ significantly from another, and an individual idiosyncrasies complicate efforts to create a universal metric for well-being. Critics argue that utilitarian calculations may overlook the protection of individual rights and liberties. The pursuit of overall happiness may lead to situations where the rights of minority individuals or specific group are sacrificed for the perceived greater good, raising ethical concerns about justice and fairness. The measurement challenges also extend to maintaining ethical consistency. Critics argue that utilitarianism may lead to morally inconsistent outcomes, as the evaluation of each action in isolation may not align with broader principles or rules. This inconsistency raises questions about the reliability of utilitarianism as a practical ethical guide. The critics of utilitarianism often highlight measurement challenges stemming from the subjective nature of pleasure and pain, cultural and individual variations, difficult in quantification, and the intricate task of predicting consequences accurately. These challenges contribute to ongoing debates about the applicability and feasibility of utilitarianism principles in diverse ethical dilemmas. Rights and justice concerns. One of the primary critics is that utilitarianism, in its pursuit of overall happiness, may lead to the sacrifice of individual rights. Critics argue that the emphasis on maximizing utility could justify actions that violate the rights and liberties of individuals, especially minority groups, undermining the principles of justice and fairness. Utilitarianism's focus on the greatest good for the greatest number raises concerns about the potential for the tyranny of the majority. In situations where the majority's happiness is prioritized, minority interests or rights may be neglected or overridden, leading to injustice and ethical imbalances. While rule utilitarianism seeks to address some of the concerns related to the individual actions, it introduces its own sets of challenges. The establishment of general rules that, when consistently followed, maximize overall happiness may still result in inherently unjust outcomes, especially when certain rules conflict with fundamental rights. Rule utilitarianism, while attempting to provide stability through general rules, faces challenges in ensuring that these rules consistently align with the principles of justice. The determination of which rules maximize overall happiness may not always coincide with the protection of individual rights, introducing a potential conflict. Rights and justice concerns in critics of utilitarianism revolves around the potential sacrifice of individual rights, the risk of majority tyranny, and the challenges of balancing overall happiness with the protection of fundamental rights and principles of justice. These concerns contribute to ongoing debates about the ethical implications of utilitarian principles in various ethical dilemmas. Neglect of intentions. Utilitarianism is often critiqued for its emphasis on the consequences of actions to the neglect of the intentions behind those actions. Critics argue that the theory places disproportionate importance on the outcomes, potentially leading to morally questionable situations where actions with good intentions are condemned if the consequences turn out to be unfavorable. Critics argue that utilitarianism may assign moral blame to individuals for unintended consequences that were unforeseeable or beyond their control. This raises concerns about fairness and justice, as individuals may be held accountable for outcomes they did not intend or could not have reasonably anticipated. Utilitarianism's consequentialist nature tends to overlook the moral virtue and integrity of individuals, as it primarily evaluates action based on their outcomes. Critics suggest that a comprehensive ethical framework should consider not only the results of actions, but also the moral character and intentions of the actors. In complex ethical dilemmas, where the consequences of actions are uncertain or difficult to predict, utilitarianism's neglect of intentions may lead to challenges. Individuals facing such dilemmas might act with good intentions but still be subject to moral criticism if the outcomes are unfavorable. The neglect of intentions of utilitarianism is a notable critique, as it raises concerns about fairness, moral luck, and the potential for exploitative behaviors. Critics argue for a more nuanced ethical evaluation that considers both the consequences and intentions behind actions for a more comprehensive understanding of morality.
So next is the application. So in application, there are two topics that I want to discuss to you. So first is the social policies and second is the environmental ethics. So first is the social politics. So social politics informing decision that aims to maximize overall social welfare like public health measures. So there are 10 topics that I will discuss to you about utilitarianism in social policies. So first is maximizing overall social welfare. So utilitarianism applied to social policies seek to maximize overall social welfare. So the primary goal is to design policies and institutions that contribute to the greatest overall happiness or well-being of the population, considering the interests and needs of the individual. Next, number two is quantitative measurement of social utility. So the utilitarian approach often involves quantitative measurement of social utility. Policymakers may consider various sector factors such as economic indicators, health outcomes, education levels, and more to gauge the overall well-being of society. The aim is to make a decision that leads to the greatest net positive balance of the utility. Number three is cost-benefit analysis. So the utilitarianism in social policies frequently involves cost-benefit analysis. Policymakers assess the cost of and benefits the different policy options. So aiming to implement measures that provide the greatest overall benefit to society. So this approach involves weighting the positive consequences against the negative consequences, taking into account short-term and long-term effects. Next, number four is distribution of resources. So utilitarian principles guide decision about the distribution of resource in society. So policymakers may allocate resources in a way that maximize overall happiness, addressing issues of inequality and social justice. This could involve target interventions to improve the well-being of disadvantaged or marginalized group. So number five is public health and social policies. So the utilitarianism is often applied to public health and safety policies. For instance, decisions about vaccination programs, environmental regulations, or workplace safety measures may be guided by the potential positive impact on overall societal well-being, even if some individual experience inconvenience or restrictions. Next is the education and social services. So utilitarians consider play a role in shaping education and social services policies. So policymakers may design programs to maximize the overall benefits to society, with a focus on outcomes that contribute to long-term well-being, such as improved education attainment, reduced poverty, and enhanced social mobility. Number seven is criminal justice and rehabilitation. So the utilitarian principle influence decision in criminal justice policies. Policymaker may focus on rehabilitation rather than punitive measures if it is deemed lead to greater overall happiness by reducing recidivism and promoting the reintegration of individuals into society. Number eight is ethical consideration and rights protection. So the utilitarianism in social policies raise ethical consideration, particularly in the protection of individuals' rights. Policymakers must navigate the balance between maximizing overall happiness and respecting the rights and liberties of individuals. Addressing concerns about potential infringements on personal freedom in the pursuit of societal well-being. Number nine is the adaptability and flexibility. So the utilitarianism allow adaptability and flexibility in responding to changing societal needs. Policymakers can resist and adjust policies based on evolving circumstances and new information, aligning with the utilitarian emphasis on pragmatism and responsiveness to the real world conditions. And lastly, number 10 is public participation and democratic values. So, utilitarianism application to social policies may involve consideration of public participation and democratic values. Policymaker may seek input from the public to gauge preference and values, aiming to design policies that reflect collective will and contribute overall societal happiness. So, next is the application. The next topic that I want to discuss to you is in the application about environmental ethics. So, considering the impact of actions on ecosystem and future generation. So, there are 10 topics that I will discuss to you about utilitarianism in environmental ethics. So, first is balancing human welfare and environmental conservation. So, utilitarianism applied to environmental ethics involves balancing human welfare and the preservation of the environment. Decision makers weigh and consequences of environmental policies aiming to optimize overall happiness while minimizing harm to ecosystem and biodiversity. Number two is long-term well-being. So utilitarian principle encourage on focus on long-term well-being. Policymakers consider the consequences of environmental action not only for the current generation but also to the future generations. This involves sustainable practices that ensures the well-being of the planet and its resource over time. Number three is quantitative assessment of environmental impact. So, utilitarianism often entails a quantitative assessment on the environment impact of the different action. Decision makers may use metrics such as ecological footprint, carbon footprint, and biodiversity indicates to evaluate the consequences of policies, seeking to implement measures that maximize overall happiness while minimizing ecological harm. Number 4 is cost-benefit analysis for environment policies. Utilitarianism in environmental ethics involves conducting cost-benefit analysis for environmental policies. So policy, policymakers assess the cost, benefits, conservation, and renewable energy adoption. The goal is to implement measures that provides the greatest overall benefit to society and the environment. Number 5 is the resource allocation and reservation. So utilitarian consider guide decision on resource allocating preservation. Policymaker may prioritize the protection of critical ecosystem, wildlife habitat, and natural resources based on the anticipated positive impact on overall happiness, recognizing the intrinsic value of the health environment. Number 6 is the environmental justice. Utilitarianism can be applied to address environmental justice issue. Policymaker may consider the impact on the environmental policy on disadvantaged or marginalized communities, aiming to minimize negative consequences and promote overall well-being across diversity population. Number 7 is mitigating climate change. So utilitarianism is relevant in crafting policies to mitigate climate change. Policy Policymakers may prioritize actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, transition to renewable energy source, and promote sustainable practices based on their positive consequences for overall well-being and the avoidance of potential catastrophic outcomes. Number 8 is the adaptability and flexibility. So utilitarianism allow for adaptability and flexibility in responding to environmental challenges. Policymakers can recess and adjust environmental policies based on evolving scientific knowledge and changing ecological conditions, aligning with the utilitarian emphasis on pragmatism and responsiveness to the real-world challenges. Number 9 is the public awareness and participation. So, utilitarianism in environmental ethics may involve raising public awareness and encouraging public participation. Policymakers seeks input from the public to gauge preferences and values related to the environment conservation, aiming to design policies that reflect collective interest and contribute to overall societal and environmental well-being. And the last is the global consideration. Utilitarian principles are applied to address global environmental challenges. Policymakers may engage in international cooperation and agreement to address issues like deforestation, biodiversity loss, and ocean population, recognizing that global well-being is interconnected with the environmental health. So, in conclusion, utilitarian ethics rooted in the pursuit of maximizing overall happiness through sequential outcomes. So, grapple with the measurement challenges and reservation regarding to the protection of individual rights. Nevertheless, its practical application in shaping social policies and addressing environmental concerns underscore its ongoing relevance on navigating complex ethical decisions. The persistent debate surrounding utilitarianism emphasizes the importance of cultivating and announced understanding of its principles, recognizing the need of adaptability and thoughtful consideration in diverse ethical contexts. So, utilitarian ethics, while emphasizing consequential outcomes, face critics related to the measurement challenges concerns for individual rights. Its application in guiding social policies and addressing environmental issues highlights its relevance in practical ethical decision making. The ongoing debate underscores the need for the understanding of the utilitarianism principle in diverse contexts. Furthermore, utilitarianism focused on adaptability and flexibility in decision making allows it to address real-world complexities, guiding policymakers in optimizing social well-being, while critics emphasize concern about the neglect of intentions and the potential for individual rights infringement. Utilitarianism remains a dynamic ethical framework that encourages ongoing reflection, refinement, and engagement with diverse perspective. In essence, its enduring presence in ethical discourse highlighting both its practical utility and the ongoing necessity for careful consideration of its principle in navigating the faceted landscape of ethical dilemmas. Thank you.